Hi all, we're going to have a look now at another decisive fun game from Corus. This time Movsesian was white against Michael Adams black, so this was in round 2, and it presents actually a system to play against the Giuoco Piano. And I want to clarify something now. It's always been a mistake of mine that I keep saying Giuoco Piano to describe this position after bishop c4, but actually this is known as the Italian game. I think the reason I've always associated Giuoco Piano with this is I would expect it to be called defence if it's a black move, but actually, this is the Italian game with the bishop coming to c4, and it's when black plays bishop c5 that technically, this is the Giuoco Piano. And I looked up Wiki to clarify this, and if we can believe Wiki, it talks about the Italian game being, one of the oldest recorded chess openings. It occurs in the Göttingen manuscript and was developed by players such as Damiano and Polerio in the 16th century and later by Greco in 1620. He gave, his name to its main line. It's, been extensively analysed for more than 300 years. So the term Italian game is now used apparently interchangeably with the Giuoco Piano. But that term, they say is after bishop c5. So maybe, other people share my confusion that they think, it should be called the Giuoco Piano defence if it's to describe a black system introduced with bishop c5. But anyway, so this occurred and white played, just castles. The Italian gambit is actually a very fast d4, and we see here a delayed Italian gambit in effect. So d4 now, and apparently, this has been recommended, to club players as an aggressive system, but it hasn't seen many grandmaster game examples. So white's gambiting, a very important central pawn in theory. So what compensation did he get from Adams? Well, Adams took on d4 with his bishop, so he's avoiding some of the complications taken with the pawn. We won't go into those variations, but after knight takes, he plays knight takes d4. Now, let's have a quick look at e takes d4. I was looking at this earlier, so e5, say, and this kind of sharp variation, has some similarities with the Max Lang attack, except white in the Max Lang attack standard has a knight on f3. So here the variations are quite different. I've been looking with Ribka, and I think queen h5 is a good move here, and it seems to secure white a nagging edge. For example, check, and now bishop g5. So if the queen takes, then there's rook takes e6 check. So if queen f5, then Ribka suggests a very funny looking move here, g4. So the queen can't take on g4 because queen takes g4 because that bishop's pinned. And if queen g6, then apparently, white gains a slight advantage by just, taking the queens off and bishop f6. So this is as far as I looked with Ribka, a very interesting position in its own right. But let's go back to the main game. So after this gambit was played, Adams first took with the bishop and then with the knight. And now white played f4. So here is white's compensation. It seems the f file, in particular the f6 knight, is going to be targeted to give black double pawns. So Adams, accepted that he would get double pawns, but it was the f5 square in front of the double pawns which proved to give white a lot of compensation, it seemed. So after h6, provoking it, bishop takes f6. White took, so he doesn't mind the g-file. There's not enough pieces to exploit that g-file, so white's king's not really in trouble at all. He simply, doubles up rooks on f6. Seems to be a very simple, easy to play plan. So that's why I think this game is a nice system in effect. If you want something to play against the Giuoco Piano when black plays bishop c5, this kind of delayed Italian gambit is a very interesting idea. And the knight rerouting now to cover f5 is very interesting. So knight c2, so it's coming to e3 and then to f5, to if5. So it seems white has a pleasant position, and Ribka gives a slight advantage to white already. So even though white's a pawn down, there's plenty of compensation and coordination here. It's very elegant, the white position, how it's very nicely coordinated on f6, and the knight's eyeing these two central squares. So knight b8 now, and then queen h5. Adams plays king g7, and now queen f3. So seemingly, strange shuffling. It's maybe, trying to provoke black into some sort of weakness. Adams just waits again. He plays king h7, and now we see knight d5. So Adams gives up his light squared bishop, but this provides now white with the possibility of later reinforcing d5 with later c4, but also this diagonal is going to be dangerous. So here Adams tried to cover up the diagonal by playing e4, but this pawn is going to drop off later, as we'll see, and then white, once he regains the pawn, will end up with a big positional advantage. So queen f4, rook d6, and now white just rounds up that e pawn. It seems, strange, passive play from black, and possibly Adams didn't need to do this bishop. Well, if he didn't do bishop takes d5, this knight is harassing that f6. So what does black do here? Rybka actually gives queen d6, so maybe that's interesting to consider. If knight takes, then there's rook takes here because of this bishop takes c4. So anyway, but Adams had committed to sort of seemingly, giving up this pawn with, e4. So once he lost that e pawn, it seems white's now arranging to play c4, strengthening that d5 pawn, but also later to use this diagonal. So king g8, now c4. And now bishop c2. So white's got a big advantage here from the opening, from this delayed Italian gambit. Queen f8, now rook e3. So the rook's quite flexible, to be able to play rook h3 or even harass black on the queen side if necessary. Rook g5, bishop f5. And, black is in real trouble now because things like h4 are also nasty to face to evict that rook, tying that the black rooks into more passive positions. King h8, rook fe1. So what is white preparing? After a5, white plays b3, and white's waiting around a bit, and black commits now with c6. So white took on c6, and after knight takes c6, plays h4, and we see now this vulnerability of the h6 pawn, as well as the pawns are a bit of a wreck. So rook d1, and there's a threat of decoying the black queen now with rook d8, because queen takes h6 will be mate. After a4, rook d8 was played. After queen g7, white took on g8, and now played rook g3, and Adams resigned here. This is crushing. If knight g6, then bishop takes g6 is very strong, because after fg, queen e4, hitting two weaknesses at the same time. If the rook moves, then rook takes g6. So what a disaster. Let's have a look at that in overview and summary again. A kind of delayed Italian gambit, so with d4. And Adams's continuation seems to give white some counterplay on the f-file. Once the black pawns are doubled, it seems white was able to coordinate his rooks to double on f6, reroute his knight to id5 and f5, and white has enough compensation for the pawn. Here, after knight d5, Adams conceded the light squared bishop, and along with that also tore open this diagonal for white. So his position was actually made considerably worse after white regained that pawn. Even though the knight seems quite strong on e5, it's not enough for this pawn wreckage and this diagonal, diagonal here. So white is definitely doing very well here, with the latent threat of h4 to evict that rook from g5. And here, c6, after d takes c6, black is in real trouble. Black played rook takes c6, h4, and now this h6 pawn is a real liability. So white exploited that with rook d1, threatening that decoy rook d8, which he now played. And now the g file turned into a tactical disaster after rook g3. So Adams had had enough. So it represents an interesting system to play against the Giuoco Piano. If we have a look, this delayed Italian gambit, worth looking into a bit more, I think. I hope you enjoyed that. Please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.